Chinese biotech just had its biggest month ever. At the same moment, Washington started discussing how to restrict the very deals that made it possible. That's not a contradiction, that's the story. I've spent a decade watching capital pathways in China's markets open and close. When the pathway narrows, capability doesn't save you. Position does. 3 megadeals in the first 5 months of 2026. Hengrui and BMS. CSPC Pharma and AstraZeneca in January. Innovent and Pfizer. The Pfizer deal alone, up to $10.5 billion, 12 oncology programs, $650 million in upfront cash, 3 deals, over $44 billion in total potential value. Second, on May 21, the chairman of a prominent House committee sent a letter to the Treasury Secretary. He urged adding biotechnology to the list of restricted sectors under the Coins Act. If added, U.S. licensing deals with Chinese biotech companies would face new restrictions. Monitoring, review, possibly prohibition. Then on June 2, 2 lawmakers introduced a formal bill, the Biotech Investment National Security Act, BINSA, licensing agreements, joint ventures, equity investments, all subject to government review. Record deal volume. In Chinese pharma there's a phrase, 卖青苗. Selling green shoots. You find a molecule, you do some early work, you sell the overseas rights to a global pharma company. Upfront payment. Milestones. Royalties. Then you move on to the next molecule. For most Chinese biotechs, this isn't a choice. It's the only viable capital pathway. The domestic payment ceiling is brutally low. A drug that sells 3 billion RMB domestically, roughly $400 million, is considered a blockbuster in China. The same drug globally can generate $30 billion in lifetime revenue. The gap isn't 2 or 3 times. It's 70 to 80 times. So you sell the overseas rights. The global buyer has the commercial infrastructure, the regulatory expertise, the sales force. You stay in the lab. They take the drug to market. And the cash from these deals has become the primary funding mechanism. Q1 2026. BD upfront payments reached $3.4 billion, up 274% year over year. That's more than A-share and Hong Kong pharma IPO fundraising combined. The capital that keeps Chinese biotech alive isn't coming from public markets. It's coming from licensing deals. The business model is the funding model. Sell the green shoots. Use the cash to fund the next batch. Repeat. The model has evolved 3 generations. Generation 1. Pure license out. Sell the overseas rights. Walk away. Collect milestones and royalties. Simple. Limited upside. Generation 2. Co-development, co-commercialization. You keep a seat at the table. Share profits in key markets. The Hengrui-BMS deal is this model. 13 programs. 4 from Hengrui. 4 from BMS. 5 co-developed. Not just selling molecules. Building a partnership. Generation 3. Newco. License the asset to a newly created U.S. company. Take an equity stake, usually under 20%. International VCs fund it. If it gets acquired, you capture the upside. Keim did this with Oro Medicines. 16 months later, Gilead bought Oro for up to $2.18 billion. Each generation captures more value. Each is more entangled with U.S. capital. And each is more vulnerable to the rules now being written. 3 regulatory actions are converging on the licensing model. Each targets a different part of the capital pathway. Front 1. The Coins Act, signed into law in December 2025. It codifies the Treasury Department's outbound investment screening system. Currently covers semiconductors, AI, and quantum. The Treasury has 450 days until roughly March 2027 to issue final rules. Section 809 is the part that counts. It gives the executive branch authority to add new industries and transaction types without new legislation. The Treasury doesn't have to wait for BINSA. It can act on its own. What's covered now? Equity investments, debt financing, joint ventures. What's not covered? Pure licensing deals without an equity component. A simple license out. where a Chinese company grants rights and collects payments. Under current text, that falls outside the scope. But the NewCo model is directly in the crosshairs. Joint ventures are already a covered category. NewCo is functionally a JV. You license the asset. You take equity. A new company is formed. That's a JV by another name. Front 2, BINSA, introduced the 2nd of June 2026. It would formally add biotechnology to the Coins Act. And it goes further. The bill specifically targets pharmaceutical IP licensing, drug discovery platforms, clinical R&D capabilities, biologics manufacturing know-how. If this passes, even pure license outs could come under review. Previous frameworks focused on equity and capital flows. BINSA explicitly targets the flow of technology and intellectual property. Citi published a note on June 3. They believe the probability of passage is low. Their reasoning: it would limit U.S. access to Chinese innovation, weaken competitiveness relative to European and Japanese pharmas, and face strong opposition from U.S. drug companies. Low probability doesn't mean zero. And the market doesn't price binary outcomes. It prices the probability distribution. A 20% chance of restricted licensing affects valuations today, not when the rule is final. Today. Front 3. The FDA data restriction. On April 29, the House Appropriations Committee included a provision in the FDA's FY 2027 budget bill. It would prohibit the FDA from accepting clinical trial data from China for new drug applications. If this becomes law, Chinese companies would need to run entirely new trials outside China. This targets the most efficient part of the Chinese biotech engine: speed. From discovery to first-in-human, Chinese biotechs move 50% to 70% faster than the global average. That speed depends on being able to use Chinese clinical data for U.S. filings. Remove that, and the cost and timeline advantages shrink. 3 fronts: capital, technology, data. Each squeezes a different part of the pathway. Together, they create a structural challenge that goes beyond any single deal. In last episode, we discussed how exit constraints create valuation discounts in Chinese AI. The same logic applies here, with a critical difference. In AI, cross-border M&A is one exit path among several. You can still IPO in Hong Kong, list on the mainland. The cross-border path got narrower. Other paths remain. In Chinese biotech, the licensing model isn't one path among many. It is the capital pathway, the upfront payments fund operations. The milestones fund expansion. The royalties fund sustainability. For most Chinese biotechs, there is no alternative that can replace this. Domestic IPOs exist, but the proceeds are a fraction of BD upfronts. Venture capital has pulled back. Government grants can't sustain a clinical stage company. Evaluate data shows the average upfront for China-based deals has risen 36% this year, from $123 million to $167 million. Chinese biotechs are pushing for higher upfronts. Some accept lower royalty floors, down to 2% to 3%, just to get more cash now. That tells you about the urgency. The pathway that delivers the cash might not stay open at the same terms. When the pathway narrows, the mechanics are straightforward. Fewer buyers participate, less competitive bidding, lower upfronts, longer due diligence, higher legal costs, more deals that don't close. The most motivated acquirers in pharmaceutical licensing are American companies: Pfizer, BMS, Merck, Abvia, Eli Lilly. In 2025, U.S. pharmas completed 47 deals with Chinese biotechs totaling $45.1 billion. 20 were mega deals exceeding $1 billion. European firms could fill some of the gap. An ING research analyst made that point. But the deepest pocketed buyers, the ones willing to pay strategic premiums, are American. When those buyers face regulatory friction, the competitive pressure on pricing eases, not because the innovation is weaker, because the buyer pool shrinks. The capability gets the attention. Position in the capital pathway decides the return. ASCO 2026 made the capability clear. 94 oral presentations, 12 late-breaking abstracts, a record. The science is not the question. The question is the pathway through which that science gets priced. The Coins Act rules won't be final until March 2027 at the earliest. BINSA may not pass. The FDA data restriction is still in Congress. None of these is certain. But all of them create uncertainty, and uncertainty shows up in deal terms, lower upfronts, smaller milestones, more contingencies, slower timelines. A Hogan-Lovells partner put it this way: an outright ban on all licensing seems unlikely given how intertwined the industries are. But a notification pathway, where each deal must be reported first, is more plausible. That extends due diligence, raises transaction costs, creates a chilling effect. The notification pathway is also a stepping stone. Today you report, tomorrow you justify, the day after you're prohibited. Each step narrows the capital pathway a little more. The sell green shoots model works when the capital pathway is open. Global pharmas need Chinese innovation to fill their patent cliff gaps. $280 billion in revenue at risk by 2031. They can't build replacement pipelines fast enough on their own. Chinese biotech provides the fastest, cheapest pipeline replenishment. That economic logic hasn't changed. The regulatory logic is also real. 3 actions moving in the same direction. Even if none reaches its most restrictive form, the cumulative effect reshapes the pathway. More friction. More cost. More uncertainty. Before I invest in any Chinese biotech, I ask 3 things. 1. Which BD model does this company depend on? Pure license out has more regulatory runway. NewCo and JV structures are in the crosshairs. If your model relies on NewCo, you're betting the rules won't change in the next 18 months. That's a regulatory bet, not a technology bet. 2. Where does the funding come from? If BD upfronts are the primary cash source, regulatory risk is funding risk. A company that depends on licensing cash is more vulnerable than one with diverse revenue. Can it survive 2 years without a major deal? 3. What's the timeline? Coins rules in March 2027 at the earliest. BINSA requires Treasury regulations within a year if it passes. FDA data restrictions still in process. These move on regulatory clocks, not technology clocks. The science might be ready. The rules might not be. The gap between the two is where capital gets trapped.
The innovation is real. Call 2026 proved that. But innovation and the capital pathway, that price is run on 2 different clocks. When the pathway narrows, the same capability gets priced lower, not because the size changed, because the pathway changed. The position in the capital pathway decides the return. That's the framework. It worked for AI in the last episode. It works for biotech here. Same logic, different industry. The mechanism is portable. Next episode, we go from capital pathway to something different. Position as the size itself when control of a gate matters more than ownership of a product. The story of EOS buying innovation in China's healthcare sector. If you found this valuable, subscribe and hit the bell. Which crossroads in China markets should we cover next? Drop it in the comments. This is China Alpha Hunter. See you next time.